That's not bad. You've got a lot of energy left. So I was, when I was preparing mentally, then I was thinking, well, these guys have been through such a lot of lectures and everything, they must be really tired. But you're not. So I think I will, after my talk, I'll give you a 1-hour exam. Well, I won't. So let me see where I want to begin from. I want to build up the argument to why do we think that schools need change, or the education system needs change. But it's not good enough anymore to say that it needs change and stop. I think it's time that we are able to also say, so what? So what should that change be? Because I increasingly find as I go around the world that governments are willing to concede that change is needed. But they don't know what that change should be. How should that change be made? And we aren't helping them. We meaning people like me. We should be telling them what to do. So I'm going to try today to have one part of what I'm saying to build to an argument of what do we think we should do, and then open it to you to see what you have to say about it. Okay? All right, let's go. Future schools and self-organizing systems. Firstly, I need to explain a little bit about the first part, self-organizing systems. What are they? And people often make a mistake. They sort of describe it as self-directed learning, or self-mediated learning, or even worse, self-learning. It's none of those. Let me try a very quick experiment and see if I can clarify that idea a bit. What I want you to do is that I want you to clap in synchrony. I want you to clap synchronously together. Can you do that? Okay. Thanks. That was easy. That was easy. But now I have a question. Who decided the frequency? You certainly didn't. How did the claps all come together? If you play that back in slow motion, you'll notice that the first fractions of a second, it's chaotic, it's random. And then a frequency appears. The only way to describe it is it appears. It's not his, it's not yours, it's not anybody's. So where did it come from? We know that it came from nobody in this room. So can I not say that whatever it is that made that frequency was not human? How do you like that? There's something not human in this hall. And it brought the claps together. It's called a self-organizing system. Some people call it spontaneous order. It's there all over nature, but we don't know anything much about it. So I'm going to say that spontaneous order and children have a relationship. I'm just about fumbling with that idea. I have no idea where it's going to go, but I thought I'd let you know. So I can't help but start off with my 16-year-old experiment, because in every talk where I have left the hole in the wall out, people have said, what happened to you? So the hole in the wall, I'll do it very, very quickly. What is it? It's a computer. It's stuck into a wall. It's 3 feet off the ground. When you put anything 3 feet off the ground, if it's an interesting looking thing, who comes there? People who are 3 feet tall. It's as simple as that. What do they do when they come there? Well, they start looking at it, and then they start fiddling around with it. And then they understand it. Why? Because something not human brings that spontaneous order there. Now, I'm not talking about theology. It is not, when I say something not human, it is the collective group of humans that is a thing which is different from any individual. And that is the story of the hole in the wall as it turned out. I had no clue when I was doing this in 1999 that what I was looking at was something that we hadn't seen before. What did we need for that? You need groups. You need to remove supervision. Supervision stops spontaneous order. And you need to have a focal point of interest. If you do that, you get self-organizing systems. What did we find out from this experiment? That groups of children using the internet can learn anything by themselves. It started off with a different statement. I used to say 14, 15 years ago, groups of children can learn to use computers and the internet by themselves. Of course, everybody knows that. But what happens after they've learned to use the internet? Well, they start looking for things. They play games, they paint pictures, and then eventually they start looking for things. And the internet gives them what it has. I thought that this was not learning. In fact, it was the reverse. The children would come in, put their homework into a search engine, copy down whatever came up on the screen, go back to school. Their teachers would say, wow, your English has become perfect. And I thought, how silly is that? I mean, that's not, I'm destroying education. But I had made a terrible mistake. And I lost 5 years in my experiments because of that terrible mistake. I didn't realize, like a fool, how were they copying down the right things? If you take a single child, show him a list of things produced by a search engine, he would go for the first one, and whether he understands it or not, he'll say that's it. If you take groups of unsupervised children, talking, chatting, shouting, fighting with each other, the right answer emerges, the good answer. From where? I don't know, I'm still looking. So I started testing the limits of this. What can they do? If I give them a difficult question in geography, can they do it? Yes. History, yes. Science, yes. Math, yes. Biology, yes. 12-year-olds with undergraduate, second year chemistry, yes. 12-year-olds, postgraduate physics, quantum mechanics, yes. It didn't stop. It's all published, this stuff. That doesn't mean that they're going to, that when 12-year-olds talk about quantum mechanics, they talk the way a experienced physicist does. But they talk sense. And they find that sense out in 25 minutes. So I'll give you a quick example of a delightful experiment, actually, that I did in a school somewhere. They, 11, 12-year-olds, I told them, what will happen if you throw this rubber ball at the wall? Well, it bounces back. And can you catch it? Yeah, I can. And then throw it back again. What will happen? Bounce back again. I said, suppose you did this millions and millions and billions of times. Could it ever happen that the ball didn't actually hit the wall, it vanished and came out on the other side of the wall? And they laughed. I said, no, that can't happen. I said, well, I'll give you the internet, I'll give you 25 minutes. 25 minutes later, they came back with Schrodinger's equation. They said, that ball is a wave of probability. It can condense. It usually condenses on this side of the wall. That's why the ball keeps coming back. But sometimes, somewhere in the universe, it can condense on the other side. We know that that's very common. I mean, anybody who has a mobile phone, there are electrons doing that all the time. But they found it out. So groups of children can learn anything by themselves. So what does that mean to education, to schooling, to anything? So these were all the various experiments that I did in several countries. I'll talk about the last one, the Gateshead experiments. One of the things we found during this experimentation was that when this spontaneous ordering happens out of a chaotic kind of situation, you can have an adult there, but an adult who merely admires the process, who says, wow, that's great, how do you do that? That's impossible, you couldn't have done that by yourself. Children will react immediately by doing something more to show off. I called it the method of the grandmother. And in England, I made a request that if you are a British grandmother with internet connection and a web camera, can you give me 1 hour of your time every week for free? And I got hundreds and hundreds. You can't imagine how many British grandmothers I know. So, actually, that's not true. They're not all grannies. There are young men, young women. Any of you can become what's called a Skype granny. The name stuck. And you can beam them. And what they do is that they make up a question, some kind of an odd question, like my question with the rubber ball. And they say, I wonder what will happen. I met this guy in the university and he said that the ball can disappear on this side and reappear on the other side. What rubbish. And she stops and goes away. Quantum mechanics appears. So that method, the method of the granny cloud, got invented in Gateshead. The presence of a friendly mediator can improve the process of self-organized learning. We put all of this together into a little school in Gateshead. Gateshead, by the way, is a tiny town on the other side of the River Tyne from Newcastle upon Tyne, which is where my university is. So it's, in a school over there, one of the teachers said, let's do the hole in the wall experiment here in England. And I said, you must have gone out of your mind, because if you do the hole in the wall in England, all you'll get are frozen children. Remember, it's done outdoors. I mean, how can you do anything outdoors in England? So they said, no, what we'll do is we'll put halogen heaters like they put outside bars and things like that. Anyway, none of that was practical. What I did was I turned the hole in the wall inside out. And it's really simple. Take a room, empty out the furniture. Put in about 4 or 5 computers with big screens. Bring in, suppose you have 5 computers, bring in 20 children. So the 20 children come in and say, what happened? Why are there only 5 computers? And you say, I don't know. It's just there, 5 computers. And then you ask them a nice question. Depending on their age, you make up a nice question. I mean, for example, if they're 9 years old, let's see what could be a good, nice question. Yes. A nice question could be, I've tried this one. Why is it that most men can grow a beard, but most women cannot? Firstly, everybody laughs about the most. But then they get onto it. It's called a big question because the question is not big, but as you might imagine, the answer is very big. The answer pulls them into evolution, into anthropology, into cell expression, into genetics, into X and Y chromosomes. It goes on and on and on. And the usual magic happens in 25 minutes. So that's a self-organized learning environment. An attempt to get the claps to come together. And it's quite inexpensive. What do you need? You need broadband, you need a collaborative environment, and you need encouragement and admiration. How do you get a collaborative environment? Well, I have found only one way to do it. Go away. Okay, don't hang around. Because if you do, if you hang around there, they don't collaborate. And I've had teachers who would, do all the things right, put 4 computers into a room, bring in all the children and say, now children, please self-organize. And then they will complain to me and say, it didn't work. Okay? It doesn't work that way. So they collaborate when they're isolated, when nobody's paying any attention to them. Have you noticed something? If you have a chaotic situation in a school, you often find children fighting with each other. But if you look at, for those of you who have had an opportunity, if you look at street children in slums and cities and things like that, you find that there's seldom fighting, very, very rarely. And I have a theory why. In the school they fight because they know that the adults will get annoyed and will yell at them. If nobody is watching, what's the fun of fighting? Okay? So if you ignore them, they don't fight, they collaborate. Here's what a soul looks like. Do you have a bit of volume on that? So these were 7-year-olds in London. The question was, awful question, why do igneous rocks form at the edges of tectonic plates? For 7-year-olds, mind you. So I kind of said it with a straight face. I said, you know, guys, I've always wondered, ever since I was a child, I've wondered, why are igneous rocks form the edges of tectonic plates? And the children said, why? So I said, what do you mean, why? So they said, why does that thingy form at the edge of the other thingy? So I said, you don't understand a word of what I'm saying, and you won't. You cannot understand this. This is very, very complicated geology. That's all it takes to start the chaos. Okay? And I still remember exactly 25 minutes of that kind of bedlam, huge amount of noise, children rushing about and so on. And then, in one corner of the room, I saw 2 little hands go up, and all the children were turned towards one corner. I saw 2 little hands go up and do the following. I'm going to put this mic away. Undergraduate geology in 25 minutes. Okay, so those were fun years, 2009, 10, 11, when in Gateshead we produced the idea of the soul. But then, a couple of years passed, and all the schools in that region were doing souls, and suddenly they kind of slowed down. And I said, what happened now? And they said, there's a big problem. Year 9, year 10, year 11 are the years when the government gives them examinations. Your soul doesn't help them to do an examination at all. The parents think that the souls are a waste of time at that point in time. They're supposed to memorize stuff and do well in the exam. I mean, you know that story. All of you have been through that. I've been through that system. It's the all-important examination of your life. It's going to determine what you'll do for the rest of your life, whether you'll get enough to eat or not. You know what this is? This is an office from the late 19th century, 1890s or something like that. No computers, no telephones, barely some electricity, rows and rows of clerks. Because in the age when there were no machines to do things, people had to do those jobs, by hand. So all of those people were basically doing the same thing. What were they doing? They were reading things, understanding what they say, the instructions, following the instructions, writing down the answers, and if necessary, doing arithmetic in their minds. Reading, writing, and arithmetic, the pillars of primary education. To do what? To produce that thing. What is that thing? It's the administrative machine, and it's made up of people. So in that system, two things were actively discouraged. Do not ask questions, follow instructions. And secondly, under no circumstances should you be creative. Can you imagine a creative clerk or a creative assembly line worker? You know, I mean, it's a contradiction in terms. So there's no point in our complaining to say schools are, you know, not developing creativity. They're designed not to. They're designed to produce identical people for an age when there were no machines to do these jobs. Well, look at an examination hall in India today, 2015. Okay? Now do you see what the problem is? It can't be clearer than that. We're preparing our children for the world of 1890. But that world doesn't exist anymore. So, when you see in the paper, you know, unemployment on the rise, young people don't want to go to school, well, why should they? So who do we, or what do we prepare them for? Well, this is going to be the office. I mean, this is the office today. All of us work in these kinds of environments. Doesn't it remind you of the hole in the wall, of people huddling together, hoping that they'll get somewhere? To prepare people for that kind of a work environment, you need an examination system which looks like this. Wouldn't that be a cool exam? Okay? So I then started thinking about this. I said, why should the examination be the only day in your life when you don't have access to the internet? Isn't it the only day in your life when you don't have your phone with you? So what are we trying to test for? So I started thinking, what would happen if I put the internet into the exam? If I said, well, here's your exam paper, here's your paper, here's a pencil, and yeah, use your phone. You can make calls, you can look up the internet, go on Facebook, do what you like. What would happen? Would it wreck the examination? I don't know, because nobody wants to try it. You know, those clerks didn't have tablet phones. But I know this, that it will change the entire system. It has to. Why? Because suppose you're the guy who's making the question paper, and you know that your students are going to have access to the internet. Would you put in questions that Google can answer in a second? What's the point? So you have to think of different kinds of questions. I'll give you examples in a moment. I mean, my question about men and beards might be one. If you were a teacher in front of a class of students and you knew that your students are going to have access to the internet during the exam, your entire teaching strategy has to change. You're going to tell them, listen, learn to search properly. You know, distinguish between what's a good site and what's a bad site. How do you compare websites one with the other? How do you figure out what the truth is? What does peer review mean? And so on and so forth. Stuff which everybody should know, but is not taught in schools. The entire curriculum has to change. Because what's the point of making a curriculum that, you know, Google can make for you? You need, if you want to drive change in the system, you cannot re-engineer the system for the educational system. You cannot re-engineer the system. But you can make that one administrative decision and change the entire system dramatically and quickly. I've been going around the world trying to tell people that, look, this is the easiest way to do it. All you have to do is try. A couple of months ago, I was in Singapore. So I actually pulled out some questions out of their end of schooling exam. In 120.34, which digit is in the 10th place? Imagine what would happen to you if you went through life without knowing that. Which is the following? Which of the following is not a factor of 64? I mean, if you're lost in the jungle and you didn't know the answer to that question, you had it. The burglar was ransacking the room when the drawer dash opened and gave him a shock. Spring open, sprang open, sprung open, springs open. Okay? If you don't know that, better keep quiet. My favorite. The top's not quite clearly visible, but anyway, so Julie has been given 3 photographs of Petri dishes with partially digested substances. Sample P, sample Q, sample R. You have to do a simple job. You have to look at the picture and you have to figure out, did it come from the mouth, the stomach, the large intestine, the small intestine? I mean, you've all had those little cheese balls outside. Think of them. Think of where they are, what they're doing, what they look like. How can you have intestines that you don't know anything about? You know, it needs to be examined properly. So Julie is going to be examined on that. So, but for a moment, take that example and say, in an internet-enabled exam, what could you have made out of that question? What question could you have made? I think the question I would have made is, where do living things get their energy from? And obviously, people will say food, and then I'd build another one and say, and so how does food become energy? And you know, to cut the long story short, you'll land up with a single element, phosphorus. I bet you'll end up with that, to say that it's done because of 2 molecules which have phosphorus in the center. And then if this was like 12-year-olds, then I would say, my God, but that's not a common element at all. So in these millions and billions of years of evolution, why did nature choose phosphorus of all things to make it the basis of all our energy? And then you'll get the big answer to the big question. We came from the sea. Now, isn't that better than Julie's intestines? So, in 2013, when I got the TED Prize, oh, I should tell you that story actually. When I got the TED Prize, you know, you can imagine, I felt very happy. This is $1 million. So, so I called I was about to call my bank, you know, I was about to call my bank to say, listen, guys, just forget all those 3-digit numbers, okay? We are talking real money now. And so, when Ted called me and said that that's not how it works. You have to give us a project, and if we like the project, then we'll give the money to your university, which is what happened. And so that money is in the university in a project called the School in the Cloud. And when money lies around in the university, do you know what happens? I mean, the way it's spent is that I get notes from the university. I won $1 million. I get notes from the university saying the taxi fare from airport to your home is not 18 pounds, it's 17.4. Okay, that sort of thing. So, but I suppose it's all for the good. So what we do is that we take the idea of the soul. Hang on. I'm going to skip a couple of slides. Okay, no, I won't. You take the idea of the soul and you apply on it a couple of measurements. I'm just going to go over this quickly. It's important to look at those measurements. These were all done from the Gateshead experiments. If you give questions, even exam questions to children, allow them to use the internet, work in groups, and then after a couple of months, retest them individually without the internet on paper, you get an incredible improvement in achievement. It's an anomalous result. How do they remember better than they did on day one? The answer is they continue to Google after the session is over. That's as far as I could get. Physics and biology experiments, GCSE questions attempted by 9-year-olds. When they do it in groups, they get to a certain point. Individual recall is again higher. GCSE A-level, I got more ambitious. A-level is, what the 17-year-olds do. Give that to 8-year-olds. This time I pre-tested them. Is it possible that they know some of this stuff from TV? Well, the answer was no, as you can see on the left-hand side bars. Post-test results, high. Of course, they used the internet, they got the answers. Individual results, also high, but this time not as high as previously, except for one subject, geography. So what? What were the subjects? Molecular structure, radiation, and geography. For 8-year-olds, for heaven's sake. And the poor fellows, they were getting these high scores, but the individual recalls were dropping, except for geography. I went crazy and said, how can I explain this? What happened? So I started interviewing them, asking their parents, and so on and so forth. And the answer was very simple, the parents. The parents said, we don't know what they were doing in school. They used to come back home and ask some terribly difficult questions from us. The only thing which we could answer was what we remembered about geography. So that's how that curve happened. And finally, and this one's going to, this one just trips me out completely. When children search on the internet doesn't know that they're children. So the internet throws everything at them. Every single thing, scientific papers, Harvard Business Review, this, that. The children read it. And as I told you earlier in the beginning, they seem to comprehend what they're reading. How is that possible? And these were Indian results. So the children are reading in a language not their own and reading adult level material in unsupervised chaotic groups. It kept reminding me of the claps coming together. This is not human. This is some sort of a collective thing that I'm seeing here. I started measuring it. And I found a couple of interesting things. The more difficult the test, the reading passage, the better the result. The easier you make it, the poorer the result. Children, if you ask them, I'm going to give you something really easy to do, would you like to do it in groups or individually, will immediately say individually. And if you say, I'm going to give you something really, really hard that only 17-year-olds can do, would you like to try individually or in groups, they'll say in groups. Okay? Because in groups, it's shared responsibility. Wait, before I come to that. So take these results. What are they saying? They're saying that you can confront children with almost anything in the curriculum. If they're in unstructured, unsupervised, semi-chaotic groups, they will make sense out of it. They will remember the results. They will read ahead of their time. We have the beginnings of a method. I used the TED money to take this to 7 places in the world. 5 of them in India, 2 in Northeast England, ranging all the way from a place in India which has nothing, no electricity, no healthcare, no schooling system, nothing at all, to urban middle-class England. And over a 3-year period, I'm trying to study where will these children go. And Jerry Rothwell, there's a filmmaker called Jerry Rothwell. TED commissioned him to make a documentary, and here is his trailer.
What is the future of learning? Schools as we know them now, they're obsolete. My wish is to build a facility where children go on intellectual adventures driven by the big questions which their mediators put in. It will be called the school in the cloud. You make your own groups, you can change your groups, you can walk around, you can look at other people's work. It's anything but a classroom, right?
Gorakati may or may not be different from the schools of England, but that's what we are going to look for.
কম্পিউটারের কোনো অভিজ্ঞতা নেই যে ওই যে শুধুই জানি কম্পিউটারের নেটওয়ার্ক তারপরে ফোনে যে এই সমস্ত গান ধরে আমার কিছুটা অদ্ভুত লাগছে।
It
it's 7 minutes from 0 to the first game appearing on the screen. And I've seen that happen for the last 15 years everywhere in the world. So I don't think progress is going to be a problem.
Almost any kind of order which occurs spontaneously always happens at what's called the edge of chaos. And that's what a soul is. You take some children, you get them into an environment which allows them to be disordered, and then you wait for order to come, and along with order comes learning.
The worst of the possibilities is that you come back here 5 years later to be a cowshed. The best of the possibilities is that if the assessment system is changed, you will find it's packed all the time.
It's not about making learning happen, it's about letting it happen.
So the idea is that if the examination system changes, then the soul or the school in the cloud becomes the central piece and not something peripheral, because that's where those skills will come. Can they run on their own? Well, we're in the middle of that. I'm halfway through the experiment. And here's what those environments look like. They're, you know, they're kind of safe, open, publicly visible cyber cafes for children. In this school, we had an Xbox. And the teacher, who's a good friend of mine, he said, you know, there's a limit to all of this. You know, you put in that Xbox in there, those children are going to do nothing other than play on the Xbox. And I said, well, are we then agreed on the fact that you are a lot less interesting than the Xbox? So, could you please make yourself a little more interesting than an Xbox? But she took it on and she did it actually. So teachers can if you sensitize them. So just to give you some of the pictures of the 7 schools in the cloud. This one's in that really remote area. There's a granny on the wall, if you can see. It's a granddad, actually. He's from Australia, and I have no idea what he is doing to the accents of the children, but they like him. The internet is intermittent. The technology is horrible to maintain. We have a long, long way to go. But there they are. And in the biggest of the lot, the facilities where 40 children can work at the same time, we have very good measurement gains. In the meanwhile, teachers have implemented souls all around the world. I've lost track of how many, tens of thousands in all of the continents. So that's them. The next billion. We'll, if you call me back next year, I'll tell you where they went. Thank you. Thanks. Don't let the claps come together, because that happens only for very boring speakers. So we have 7 minutes. I wished I was going to try for 15, but I've managed 7. And I'm seriously very interested in this. That do you have either a comment or a question? And somebody will have to help me here, because I can't quite see. The lights are right on my face. So you choose who you want to give that to.
Thank you. I'm Christian from Budapest. I'm really fascinated with your lecture. And my question is, do you think that, or do you know that your method could work also for high school students, for older students? If not, why is that? And if yes, what are the implications of that? Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for asking. I'd forgotten to say that. So I started on this about 2 years ago. I have 2 PhD students working on this. One of them is working on vocational education with 17, 18-year-olds who learn a craft or let's say hairdressing or cooking or masonry and that sort of thing. The other is working in the university with a university course, a regular Newcastle University course. I have the intermediate results right now, and I think they're at a position where I can say them. Earlier I would have said, look, don't ask because it's too early to tell, but it's not. I mean, the analysis is halfway done. YouTube can replace much of what we call FE, further education or vocational education. I have examples from cooking, I have examples from hairdressing, I have examples from masonry, where you simply tell the kids, the 17, 18-year-olds, go ahead, build a 2-story scaffold, use YouTube. Their first reaction is it's not allowed. So it takes me more time to break that than for them to get onto that. And once you let them, once they realize that you're really going to leave them unsupervised, they did it. This was in a place called Barking near London, with students who the school described as barely out of jail. Okay? So they did it. They built the 2-story scaffold, stood on top of that, photographed themselves, and put it on Facebook. So it kind of challenges the entire system. In the university course, well, I mean, that makes me feel really ashamed. The students achieved the same results as they would have in a taught course. I mean, what can I say? This is a university postgraduate course, which was not taught, and they did SOLs instead. What does that mean for the whole system? So the answer to your question, yes, it does work. But it doesn't work when adults are strangers. Adults have a couple of idiosyncrasies. If they don't know each other, then they're very worried that other people will think that they are bad. So given a task to do, they'll say, well, I'm not tech savvy, you try it, or something like that. If they're great friends, then they begin to behave like children. What does that mean? Well, one of my stories again, children in groups, so they're constantly talking to each other, pushing each other, you're an absolute idiot. And by the way, something, and that other guy also wants to retaliate and said, well, you think that you know everything, but did you brush your teeth this morning? Because they're very close to each other. so all that can happen if you have friends working together, not otherwise. So if you are planning to try it, then try it with a group where you let them have enough time together to know each other at that level, where they're no longer insecure about what the others will think. Okay. All right. Any other question?
Hello, I'm Daniel. It was a very, very fantastic presentation, by the way. And my question would mainly be that you stated clearly that you have less computers than students, and why is that? And my other question would be, how important is it to individualize the learning process to make it less of a group effort and more of an individual effort in the later stages?
Not very clear answers in my mind, but the first question is easy. If you want an unsupervised, mildly chaotic, collaborative environment, then obviously the number of computers have to come down. Otherwise, you would have to tell people, make groups. But that is prescriptive. That goes against how the system works. But if there are 5 computers and 20 children, you don't have to tell them to make groups because they'll make groups anyway. They don't have a choice. That group has to happen, because if the group doesn't happen, the claps won't come together. Do you see what I mean? It's very complicated, but I mean, I'm still trying to figure it out. But there is something about groups which you cannot replace with the individual. But your second question is important. Does that always have to be so? Well, I don't know. The only thing I can think of is an example from our education system. For your entire schooling, for your undergraduate, and for most of your postgraduate stuff, you are taught and examined. Taught and examined until you reach the top of the system, the PhD. What do they do at the PhD level? They give you a question to which no one knows the answer. And then they give you a supervisor who is usually never available. And then they tell you, go and solve it in 2 years' time or 3 years' time. Who do you have? Your friends. And for those of you who have been in a PhD, you know what frustrations and what depression PhD students go through. But what I can't understand is why maintain 20 years of a structured system and then end with a soul? So what I'm trying to do is to drive the PhD method right down to the 9-year-olds or the 8-year-olds. Hence the groups, hence the lack of supervision. Yes, they will go and do things individually. In today's world, what happens is, at least in the developed countries, the soul or the school in the cloud may have a few computers and therefore groups, but when they go back home, everybody has their own device. So everybody does actually text each other, do more searching and so on. But if you do that inside the school, they stop talking with each other. And that spoils the collaboration. You know, why is that talking important? Why is that interaction important? For a very simple reason. I'll tell you what the theory is in physics about why the claps come together. It's very interesting. Your ear hears the average of about 7 or 8 people around you and responds to that average. If you were all deaf, the claps would not come together. Okay? And these bubbles of averages then hear each other and so on, and you get emergent behavior, and my time has run out.
You're not deaf, are you?
No.
So, in a second, don't go anywhere for something else you're not expecting, but before that, really put your hands together many, many, many times. I told you he's a superstar. Thank you so much.